Welcome to our virtual Pig Week. For the next 4 days, 1 hour each day, we're going to bring you lots of pig related content that you can adopt on your farm to help improve the performance. And today we're going to take a virtual tour of the Moorepark Pig Research Facility, where we'll meet our farm manager Tomás Ryan and the staff here to see what they're doing on Moorepark and how you can implement it at home. Tomorrow we'll address some key husbandry topics aimed at farm staff in particular. We'll see what we do here in Moorepark and discuss why you should be considering doing it on your farm. On Thursday, we're going to visit a progressive farm in Cork and see what they have done to improve the health and performance of their herd while reducing antibiotic usage, and also look at some alternative renewable energy systems that they've implemented and how they've reduced production costs as a result. And on Friday, we're going to host a webinar with our guest speaker, Dr. Scott D. from Pipestone Research in the US, to see the role that feed ingredients can play in the transmission of disease. So lots to look forward to. We hope you'll enjoy.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Emer McCrum and I'm one of the Teagasc Pig Advisors based in Ballyhaise in County Cavan. I'd firstly like to start off by reiterating Kieran's warm welcome to you all on the first day of our virtual Pig Week event. As Kieran mentioned, we will be live each day between now and Friday from 1:30 to 2:30. So I do hope you'll be able to join us for the rest of our sessions before the weekend. The focus of today's session is going to be on the Teagasc Pig Research Facility in Moorepark in County Cork. This is a fantastic opportunity to be brought along on a guided tour of the unit by Farm Manager Tomás Ryan. I'll be joined shortly by Tomás as part of our panel discussion, and also by Aisling Holmes, who is one of the research technicians on the Moorepark unit. The format for today is going to consist of a series of short video clips followed by a live Q&A session with Tomás and Aisling. So I encourage you, if you have any questions at all throughout the session, to pop them into the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and I will put those questions to Tomás and Aisling as we go. So without any further ado, we'll get started with the first video clip of the afternoon, where Tomás will bring us into the dry sow and the farrowing facilities on farm, and also give us an overview of the research unit.
Welcome to the Teagasc Pig Research Facility. My name is Tomás Ryan, Farm Manager here at the Pig Unit. And today we're going to take you on, I suppose, a tour of the facility itself and have a close look at maybe some of the more commercial aspects and also some of the more research specific aspects that we have here within the facility. So here I am standing outside the facility. Behind me you can see it. The block behind me now just contains some office spaces and some shower facilities and also staff canteen facilities. So as with any other commercial unit on the go in the country at the moment, biosecurity is at the fore. Here we demand that all unit visitors and all unit staff entering the facility shower in, and we also have very strict 48-hour pig clean rule as well. So now if you want to follow me, we'll go in, shower through the facilities, and we'll see you on the other side. Okay, so here we are just after showering out of the shower facilities and about to enter the Moorepark Pig Research Facility. As I said, this building was opened in 2016 and it contains two separate buildings. The building behind me here that we're about to enter is what we term our breeding building. This breeding building contains the 200 sow herd. It contains approximately 1,000 weaners over three weaner rooms, and it contains 62 farrowing places, 56 conventional and 6 freedom type crates. We also have a number of bespoke experimental rooms within this building, some fire equipment, feed intake recording equipment, some sampling crates, some lifting crates, and some area that we can just, I suppose, mould and change it to whatever need we needed to supply for the experiment in hand. So in parallel to this building then is the finisher building, which we will look at later in the tour. Welcome to the Moorepark Pig Research Facility. This is the breeding building, as I said earlier. So welcome to the farrowing house section of the Moorepark Pig Research Facility. This room we're in now contains our freedom farrowing crates. There are 6 crates in this room. Typically the crates are 2.4 metres long by 2.1 metres wide. This would be in comparison to our standard farrowing crate, a little bit larger. Our standard crates are 1.8 metres by 2.1. So these crates, as you can see, they have a cast iron insert and plastic flat around it with just one single heat pad here. The crate, as it stands in its current formation, is in the loose or freedom setting, and this is usually put into this setting when the sow enters the farrowing house at day 110 of pregnancy, up until maybe 2 days before the expected due date, and then the sow is left in the conventional locked-in crate style for about 7 days post-farrowing, and then the crate is opened again once all piglets are viable, happy and healthy, and able to maneuver around the sow themselves. So, as I said, 6 crates in this room. This is part of an overall farrowing capacity of 62 crates that we have here in Moorepark. You will see some of the conventional crates in a while. There's 56 of those and 6 here. These are fed by dry feed on our dry pro exact feed system, and the canister here whole feed, and it's dropped down to the sows. We have the capacity here to also tip the troughs out for excess water or some old spoiled feed, but also from the research aspect, it allows us to do weigh-backs of any uneaten diet and take it away accurately. So to open the crate, it's quite a simple procedure. The front of the crate detaches from the head of the sow and swings across to a bracket on the right hand side, and then the back of the crate is opened out to a wider formation and closed, allowing the sow to freely move around. Okay, so here we are in what we typically class some of the conventional farrowing accommodation here in the Moorepark Pig Research Facility. This room we're in now contains 7 crates. So I suppose the direct comparison really in space allowance or space loss between the Freedom crates next door and the conventional crates here is we have 6 crates in the Freedom room and 7 crates here. So you're looking at a loss of a crate divided up amongst the cells. Right, so just I suppose to briefly talk about the full cycle setup here, as this is our typical accommodation. Sows enter here at day 110 of pregnancy. Typically come in on the Friday from the ESF house across the way, the week before due date, and they enter the crates here. As you can see, it's cast iron under the sow here with plastic slats around and a single heat pad on this side. This heat pad sits under this microclimate or canopy area as well, which we usually drop down for about the first week post-farrowing. We also have the ability to supply additional heat lamp source here at the front of the canopy, and the back of the crates have an additional socket, one for each place, where if we wanted to put an additional heat source at farrowing time at the back of the sow, we can do it. So the crate itself is a standard enough formation. The troughs we spoke about next door have the ability to tip out excess water or stale feed. We can also remove a panel at the front of the crate here, which allows us for experimental work to slide in a capture tray and tip any weigh-back feed into it that needs to be weighed back from the animal that would go down as not being recorded as intake should she be on an experimental diet. So the sows will farrow here anytime from kind of Tuesday, Wednesday of the following week. Our gestation into the Moorepark herd is 116. So Thursday is day 116 for us from our service day. We would typically induce sows on the Thursday morning on their 116 day that haven't farrowed to farrow the next morning on Friday and Friday during the day. I suppose the batch system we work here, which is a 3-week cycle, it kind of helps us to keep a compact enough farrowing to keep all pigs of a similar age, and to really, I suppose, divide out our labour resources as best we can and assign them here for those days. The piglets themselves in this area, every piglet is tagged and weighed individually at birth and recorded to its mother, and recorded if it's transferred on across fostering within that first 24-hour period. And that all goes on the cell cards, which you'll see at the end of each cell. So the feeding system is the same as the Freedom farrowing rooms next door to the Dry Pro Exacta. You see the feed comes along in pellet form and is dropped down into the canister and fed down to the sow. The feeding regime we work here in Moorepark is the first 10 days of lactation, the feed is split into a morning and evening delivery, and from 10 days to the end of lactation it's divided into 3. So typically our performance here in the farrowing house at the moment is around 14.5 to 15.5 born alive across the batches, and we're weaning out consistently year to date between 13 and 13.5. Our weaning weights at the moment are still over 8 kilos, typically 8.1. 8.2. We introduced creep here at day 14 of lactation, and we really try to maximise intake as best we can between there and weaning. Our typical lactation duration at the moment, our age of piglet is about 27 days of age up to. Okay, so here we are just in another one of our farrowing rooms, a conventional farrowing rooms if you want to term it like that. We have 3 rooms of 14 places in Moorepark, 2 rooms of 7, and 1 room of 6 being those freedom farrowing crates. So 62 places in total and 56 general conventional type places, fixed crate. Just, I suppose, the points to just note in these rooms compared to what commercial units would have is our centre passageway here that I'm standing in is about 1.2 metres wide. I suppose that would be close to maybe twice as wide as a conventional room. We would use this space for all the additional measures and work we would perform within the farrowing house, as I said, the individual weighing and tagging of all piglets, obviously the processing, vaccination, ironing of piglets, but any additional work that the experiments would require to in the way of close inspections on piglets' health, welfare, locomotion checks, things like that. So the additional space is really needed for us to work within the rooms. We also have 2 header passageways in these rooms going along the front of the sows. These passageways are used primarily for allowing us to gain access to the feed troughs, as I mentioned earlier, to do weighbacks, but also to feed the sows and closely inspect the troughs. And it also gives us the additional working area in the way of being able to leave litters out of the front of the crate and watch them move up and down in this little corridor and put them back into the sow. And should certain experiments require mingling or co-mixing of litters, it gives us the option to do that. So we really have to cover all the bases here, but as I said, it's a 14 place conventional sow.
Our dry sows are fed on 2 competent 6 ESF stations. Each station is capable of feeding 80 sows per day, so we have capacity here for around 160 sows. Our maximum occupancy really is around 130, 140 mark. All our gilts in first pregnancy are held in a smaller section of our dry sow accommodation on their own specific ESF station. The main advantages to the ESF, or electronic sow feeding stations, for us being a research facility, is the sows can be weighed by the in-house balance, which is contained within the feeder itself, and we can have a live weight delivered to us throughout gestation, but also that the animal is able to, I suppose, eat from a number of different diet choices available through the station. So we typically have 2 hoppers on each station, providing either diet A or diet B, and we have the ability to top dress another component over this as well, giving us I suppose an overall variation of up to 6 different diets for each ESF station itself. From a husbandry and commercial standpoint, the ESFs are a great choice here because the sows are enclosed while feeding. You can feed securely, but also they offer us the ability to draft out sows for different husbandry jobs, like vaccinations, possible sows in heat for heat detection, and of course we can draft out our sows at day 110 of gestation for entry to the farrowing house.
Fantastic. So that was our first video clip this afternoon, where we got a great insight into the breeding and the farrowing facilities on the Moorepark unit. So we have a couple of questions here, and I might put the first one to yourself, Tomás, and it's just around the genetics that you're using on the farm. So you mentioned in the video that you stocked the farm in 2016. So you might chat us through maybe the journey, what genetics you stocked with and what you're using currently on the farm.
Thanks, Emer. Yes, be delighted to. So, as you said, in 2016, we opened the facility here in Moorepark, and what we went with originally was, it would be termed, I suppose, for the maternal line now, PIC Hermitage Large White Landrace F1 gilts. So they stocked the unit, and we matched that in with the Danish Duroc Terminal AI from PIC Hermitage as well. So we ran that combo of genetics, I suppose, for the first 3 years here in the herd. And then the decision was made in, I suppose, kind of early 2019 to change up our terminal line again. So we reviewed a few lines then, and what we went with was the Teagasc terminal line, the tempo line. So we kept the maternal line as is. I suppose we're a little bit restricted in being a research facility as to what kind of changes we can do with our maternal line over our terminal line. So that has to remain kind of static for the longevity of the work we do. But as I said, we match that with the tempo, and yeah, it's working well, and we are achieving quite satisfactory growth rates to date. So happy with that.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Tomás. The second question then I have is on performance being achieved on the unit. Now, I know it's quite hard to compare a conventional commercial farm to a research facility, but Aisling, maybe you'll talk us through just some of the main KPIs that you are achieving on the farm at present.
Yeah, no worries. So at present, we're looking at an average live born of around 15.1. And our weaning then is coming out at somewhere between 13 and 13.5 on average. And I suppose for our weight of our piglets, we're seeing kind of 8.2 to 8.3 kilos per piglet. And we're quite lucky at the moment. We're having a great farrowing rate. Currently, we're having about 96% successful farrowing rate.
Fantastic. Perfect. Thank you, Aisling. So I might just put one last question to the panel before we move on. And Tomás, I might ask you, we saw in the video there that you've got both conventional farrowing crates and free farrowing crates on the farm. So would you be able to give us, maybe just in your own experience, some differences, if any, that exist between the conventional and the free farrowing crates?
Yes, thanks, Emer. Yes, as you saw there, so we have 56 conventional places and 6 of these kind of free, loose farrowing crates. And they have been it's been a learning experience and a learning curve. We've conducted various amounts of kind of research or specific research work on them, and we've also just used them for kind of general husbandry use. They are kind of surplus to what we normally, our normal quota of farrowing crates. We have the 56 based on 2 banks of 28 for our batch system. So when we do farrow over and above that, we tend to use the overflow into that accommodation. But I suppose, simply put, we don't see any striking benefit or dissimilarities to the crates from generic use or standard husbandry use, but we have learned 1 or 2 things about them along the way. As I mentioned in the video, we have learned that there's a benefit to when we introduce sows at 110 days of gestation, to allowing the sow that free time in the crate in its open formation to, I suppose, get used to her surroundings and get used to her footings and stuff. So when the crate is opened post farrowing, that she is much more comfortable in that area and has learnt about that area, so that the piglets really, I suppose, have every chance of avoiding any kind of incident there. From a production standpoint, the mortality figures, okay, although we haven't put anything near the same volume of animals through these crates as the conventional crates, but from a production standpoint, mortality would be quite similar. We probably would see maybe a higher incidence of crushing in the loose crates in their open formation over the standard crates. So maybe, I suppose, with a bit more tweaking and a bit more learning, there is the potential there to refine and reduce that element of crushing mortality to maybe give us a slightly better weaning number out of those crates over the conventional system. But it's a constant learning process, but they would be quite similar and quite on a par to each other at present.
Perfect. Thanks, Tomás, and thank you to you both for the answers to those questions. And we might move on now to our second video clip, where we'll see some of the research equipment and facilities in place in Moorepark, and also a look at the feed systems on farm as well.
So here we are, just at our sow lifting crate, and it was originally brought here into the facility as part of the research work of one of our PhD students. So it was being utilised really to, I suppose, look at gilt development. So it was a very handy tool in that respect, because the sour gilt can easily just enter the crate. There's a padded support in the middle bar that just holds the sow, and then they're lifted safely and securely, and the feet can really be inspected. That was the real, I suppose, primary objective of it in the unit for that experiment. But since that experiment is finished and we still have the crate, any sow with, I suppose, bad gait or bad locomotion and hooves that need to be paired or looked at closer, we can just run her down here, pop her in, lift her safely and securely, and do our inspection. So this is a nice, I suppose, piece of kit to have in the facility for varied uses.
Right, so another room we just said we'd stop off and look into, I suppose, which would be outside of the norm for a commercial pig research facility, would be this room, and it's kind of a multitask room. We use this room currently for blood sampling cells. So this device that's here in front of me is our crate for holding cells when we need to blood sample. I suppose its primary objective is for safe blood sampling for both the operator and the animal herself. Some trials here in Moorepark on cells would require frequent intervals, maybe 2 or 3 times over gestation or lactation of blood sampling. So it's something that you kind of want to do quickly and do well. So the cell is introduced here. She is snaffled at the front of the crate quite quickly. We can open up the side here or the front to go in and access the jugular vein of the neck, take the blood sample, close up our gates, release the cell, and she exits that point and off out the door behind you there. So
Start to finish, the whole process generally takes less than a minute, and it's a nice safe way for both the operator and the animal to perform the task.
right, so here we are in some of the bespoke experimental research weaner accommodation. Here we have 12 pens with these, each one having what's called a fire station or a feed intake recording equipment station in it. So what these stations do, it offers a number of benefits from a research point of view, but the main one really is that the pigs here can be fitted with an individual transponder, much like the sows in the ESF house. And we can record their individual intake in from the station as a group. So here what we do is we leave our litters intact, like our normal weaning throughout the whole unit, and we can look at the overall consumption as a litter, but more importantly the individual consumption within that litter. So basically the station itself works very simply. The piglet will come up to the front of the station will identify the transponder of the piglet. It will then open the door and allow the pig to feed. So what the station has done before this is weigh the contents of the trough, and then once the pig is finished eating, it will close the door and re-weigh the contents of the trough, and the difference is allocated to that pig as consumption. So computer software working in the background then tallies up all these consumptions over the course of a day or a week, and when we want to download them then we can and attribute the intake across all the individual pigs. So the stations themselves are quite easy and user-friendly. We can also monitor kind of daily intakes from a husbandry point of view here where I'm standing. So we can check that every pig within the pen has eaten over the course of the day by simply logging in, checking the transponder numbers of all the 12 or 13, 14 pigs, whatever's in that litter, and making sure there's a consumption account across them. So I suppose from a refinement point of view, if we look solely at research, equipment like this allows us to move away from individually housing pairs of pigs or individual pigs and being able to keep them more in their social group and still get the best of both worlds by recording individual intake and grouping. Welcome to one of our 2 mixed kitchens here on the Moorepark Pig Research Facility for our dry feed systems. Behind me we have 2 of our dry exact pro systems by Big Dutchman. So this one here to my right is responsible for feeding our weaner pigs, and this one in the background to the left is responsible for feeding the sows on their supply feed their ESF stations, and also the sows in lactation and service area. So just to give you a very quick and basic rundown on what these feed systems do is outside we have a certain amount of silos dedicated to each feed system. So for the weaner one here, for example, there are 11 silos. All of them are 6-ton silos, and we can fill each silo with standard commercial diets, be it say weaner and link, or experimental diets for whatever trials we have going on at that time. So when the computer looks to bring in a certain diet or component, it calls to that bin. You can see up above it here, there's an array of orders being fed into the mixing chamber, and the motor here will pull the component into the mixing chamber. It will weigh out the predefined amount, and then once the correct weight is there, it will then drop it in to the left or right side of this feed hopper and assign it to one of the 2 circuits, circuit 1 or circuit 2. And they're just responsible for covering a certain amount of weaner pens each. So the diet bin is dropped into this circuit, and it's a chain and disc system which runs within the circuit. So the computer will know the volume of feed, how much length of circuit that takes up, and it will follow that around the circuit, and it knows when that component or diet is getting to its destination pen,
it will open the valve by air, and then the feed component within those discs will drop down into that valve. So essentially that's how we know the exact weight and what type of feed is delivered to what pen. And that's all contained in the big FarmNet computer system, which processes and stores all those little deposits throughout the day. So these feed systems typically run about 6 to 8 times a day, and whenever a feeder is below the required level, that sensor within the feeder will ask for a feed to be included on the next run. So the cell one behind me works in exactly the same way, 2 circuits. As I mentioned earlier, the farrowing house is fed in 2 splits up to 10 days of lactation, and then 3 from then on, so that's the amount of times that one will run in a day. And the ESF stations are on a different timing system then, depending on the frequency of how those cells feed over the 24-hour period. So there will be more feeds delivered throughout the night and less than throughout the day as demand for intake goes down in that. Right, welcome to the Moorepark feed mill. So here is where we would manufacture the vast majority of all our diets for the unit. All our experimental diets are manufactured here, and as I said, the vast majority, if not all, of our standard commercial type diets, if you want, are milled here also. So the mill has been in existence here in Moorepark, I think, since the late 80s, and it can produce feed in both meal and pelleted form. We normally transfer the feed from the unit here in our meal tractor and trailer outside, so it's deposited into the silos, transferred up and blown in like conventional delivery system into the silos. Or we can also bag off the rations here as well, depending on what type of experiment we're doing, or I suppose more importantly, maybe the type of area the experiment is happening within the unit. So say for the main unit above the new unit, it would be all pelleted and dry feed. Meal will be supplied to the wet feed building, and the breed evaluation unit building, where a lot of our bespoke experimental research happens, would all be bag fed.
Great, so that was our second video clip of the afternoon. So we got a look at some of the research facilities and the equipment on the farm, which brings me to my first question, which I might put to yourself, Aisling. We saw there that you have a handling crate for the sows on farm, and you mentioned the blood sampling. I suppose typically on a commercial farm, you would have the vet visit maybe once or twice a year and blood sample the animals at various stages. But you did mention that this is something that's done a little bit more frequently in Moorepark. So I might just ask you maybe why you blood sample and perhaps what you're looking for when you're sampling the sows.
Yeah, no worries. So I suppose it's important to say first that the sampling that would happen sometimes here would be outside of herd diagnostics. Because Moorepark is a research facility, it's research based that we would be taking these additional samples from the sows. So it would be dependent on different trials or experiments that are happening on the farm. And then to say as well that these would be all licensed experiments coming from HPRA, and the people taking it would be trained and have authorization for that. So I suppose there would be different, depending on the experiments, it would depend on why we're taking the blood samples, but an example of such would be for nutritional studies, either in, for the sow's gestation length, or during lactation in the sows. So it could be that they were on, say, there might be a supplement in their feed, and then you're checking if that supplement is effective and actually getting into their system, and you can test that then to see if it's present in the blood afterwards, and how effective that treatment is working on the sows as such.
Perfect, Aisling, thank you very much. And the second part of the video clip then, we saw a look at some of the feed systems that are in Moorepark. So Tomás, I might come to yourself now with the second question. And we saw the fire stations there, and I mean, it's a fantastic piece of equipment to be able to record individual pig intakes, but you might just give us a recap on fire stations, how they work and what you use them for, please.
Thanks, Emer. Yeah, delighted to. So fire station feed intake recording equipment. We have 12 stations in our weaner section here in the facility and 12 stations in our finisher section. The pigs are weaned directly out onto them, and I suppose after probably a week's training, the stations, I suppose, are viable and can start really recording accurate data from that point on. So the stations work quite simply. The piglet would be given a transponder at weaning, and then this is the, I suppose, the mode of identification for the station to the pig. Once that transponder is picked up at the
trough, a door opens, and then allows the pig to eat. So once the pig moves away, the door closes. The station has weighed the contents of the trough before the pig has attended to eat, and also once the pig leaves. The difference then is allocated to the pig as consumption. So this is just basically tallied up over the course of the day over many, many feed events for each pig in some background software, and allows us to come along then on a weekly or monthly basis and download the intakes for each individual pig of that entire litter or pen group. I suppose, as you mentioned, the beauty of it really is it allows us to gain kind of individual intakes from pigs without having to individually house pigs, still keeping them in their social group, in our case, in their intact litter. So we really are, I suppose, achieving hopefully kind of maximum performance and maximum intake from pigs in that state. So that's kind of I suppose a quick recap on how the fire stations work here.
Brilliant, Tomás. Thank you very much, and thanks again to you both. And we move on now to our third video clip of the afternoon, where we will see the finisher section in Moorepark and some of the various facilities specifically for the finisher pigs on farm.
Okay, welcome to the start of our finisher accommodation. This house we're in now is a bespoke wet feed house, so all the pigs that reside in the accommodation here are wet feed fed. Pretty much 100% of the pigs that come down to this house do enter onto some sort of a wet feed study or trial. So behind me here you can see some of the wet feeding system. It's another big Dutchman wet feed system. This one is called the HydroAir, and the main way this system works is, of course, outside, like dry feed, we have 4 component silos. The system will call for the correct component to bring in a correct diet. The diet will be assigned to one of these 2 mixing tanks, and it will go in, water's mixed up, stirred and fed out. But how this system feeds out the feed is the interesting part. So we have the normal monoflow pump here at the bottom, which pulls the feed out of the tank in a kind of a pre-weighed amount, and then assigns it to the line, the feed line, to be distributed to the pen. But this system works by air. So it actually uses air pressure to blow the feed, if you will, to the destination pen and down into the wet feed trough. The advantage to this really is it leaves very, very little residue of feed between feeds, so we have no crossover of diets as such and no contamination. So the system has been here since 2016 and works very well. So we also have some extra tanks behind us here, which we, depending on the type of experiment, it gives us, I suppose, more flexibility, more variability to introduce more factors into the experiment and what we want to do. So as I said, typically if most of our experiments here would be a 4 diet experiment, so we have 4 silos out the back. Inside in the house itself we have 36 pens. You would see a very big difference in the amount of penning in the area of the room within this facility compared to a commercial facility. Typically here the pens only hold between 5 and 6 pigs. This is done essentially so that we can have what's called more replicates of pens per treatment. So based on that 4 treatment design, the 36 pens in here, that would be 9 pens on each treatment, and that would be sufficient then for the experiment to be statistically robust. So normally then with the 2 mixing tanks, we can assign 1 tank to mix say 1 and 3, and the other mix tank to maybe mix 2 and 4. So here we are just inside in the pig accommodation of the wet feed facility, and this will give you a little flavour as to how it looks. Currently it's in the middle of being washed for the next experiment to start in 2 weeks' time. The last one just finished up last week, and you can see here typically the size of the pens, but also the amount of pens in this room area. As I mentioned, this is to give us a kind of a robust statistical spread across all the diets that are used. So 5 to 6 pigs per pen. We have timber enrichment in all these houses. It's a short trough system within the house here, which is typically about 1 metre long, and within that then is a sensor, and depending on how many feeds that run throughout the course of the day on the experiment, when the feed is below the sensor level, then that feeder is included in the next feed run. So something similar to the dry processing that we talked about earlier. Okay, so here we are in, I suppose, one of our older buildings. And this building is termed the Breed Evaluation Unit, or BEU, and it's been here since '94. And this is one of our
kind of more bespoke research buildings. So everything that happens within this building is purely research based. There's no general husbandry or commercial pig work that goes on in here. So the room we're in at the minute, we have 4 of these rooms. This is one of our weaner room, and each room here contains 24 pig places, depending on how we configure the pens. Currently the pens are configured into a larger state for the last experiment we had here. So as I said, 4 rooms, 24 places per room, so 96 places, and everything here is done manually or by hand. So all the pig feeding, weighing, recording, it's all done by hand and on paper. So it's quite labour intensive, but it does produce a lot of really good, valuable research work and a lot of extremely accurate research work. So also in this building, we have a finishing section. So I suppose pigs will enter here at weaning from the main unit, spend approximately 6 to 8 weeks in this accommodation, and then be transferred to the other half of this house into the finishing accommodation for the next 12 or so weeks until they would be up to finishing weight. So we have the ability here to run really from weaning to slaughter type study, or just a separate weaner side study, or an individual just separate finisher type study. So we can interchange and intermix those quite well. So yeah, this building is certainly different to what you would see in a commercial unit, but certainly a vital part of the work we do here. So welcome to the finisher building in the pig research facility. This is one of the 2 buildings that was opened up in 2016 when we built the new facility. So this finisher building contains approximately 14 to 1500 pigs, depending on what rooms are full at the time. We have 4 standard commercial rooms, so each one contain 1 production batch of pigs. So typically those rooms, the pen configuration is 30 pens per room, and each room will hold between 330 and 350 or 60 pigs, depending on what's in that batch. So as I said, we have 4 rooms of those.
There's a slight variation within the rooms now. I suppose the overview of them is 2 rooms of the facility have the ability to remove penning, so we term these flexible penning rooms, and they're really from a purely experimental standpoint. It allows us to compare different group sizes all the way up to really a maximum of 48 or 50 pigs, so we can really combine either 1 pen into 2 or 2 pens into 4. Another room here in the facility is divided into 3 rooms of 10 pens. So it has a wall from the tank right up to the ceiling, so it's a completely separate and independent room to the other 2 rooms. Its benefit, I suppose, really is slurry emissions type work or gaseous emissions type work. We can put in different types of sensors to record, I suppose, the background environment that the pigs are in those different rooms, based on, I suppose, the space allowance or the type of diets that the pigs are on in those rooms.
So the corridor I'm standing in here now, it's around 80-85 metres long. This building, we have a 2.1 metre corridor in this building, which is a luxury compared to most commercial pig facilities, but yet again, like the breeding building, we need that extra space for the amount of times we work with the pigs and the amount of measures that any specific experiment might require us to do with the pigs. So we need quick and easy progression of pigs up and down the building. What I'm standing on here is one of our 2 batch weighers in this building, and we also have another batch weigher for weaner pigs over in the breeding building.
So this batch weigher is approximately 4 meters long, and the main benefit to this is that it can easily contain plus 20 to 25 pigs in it. This really comes into its own when we have experiments, when we're looking at the entire pen as a whole and we need to perform entire pen weights. It also gives us, I suppose, a little bit of room to maneuver within the pen or within the scales if we want to inspect the pigs or identify any tag numbers or replace any tags or any husbandry things like that also. Its real bonus then is when we're comparing different group sizes, like I mentioned earlier. If we're comparing pens of 24 to pens of 12, we can perform this task in one simple operation.
So there's another one at the other end of the building that's slightly smaller, but because the building is 80 metres long and we could be weighing 30 or 60 pens a number of times per week, it saves a lot of time and a lot of effort on the pig's behalf, having to travel the length of the building up and down.
Also within this building we have two MLP or fire equipment station rooms, very similar to the weaner accommodation over in the breeding building. Most of the time our pigs that are on those weaner MLP stations or fire stations will come directly across to the equivalent finisher accommodation, and the same information can be recorded and stored for those pigs here. One of the finisher rooms then contained within this building. The room we're in at the moment actually has the individual penning. So this room offers us the ability to create different group sizes, as I stated. So either single pens into doubles, or maybe even doubles into quadruples to create groups comparing maybe 10 up to 40 or even 50 pens. So this room, the standard configuration is 30 pens per room. There's 3 corridors in each room. Here we're in the first corridor, and the weaner rooms in the other building would be the exact same configuration, and typically the pigs would move pen per pen across, so everything kind of stays identical. So the passageways within the room here, these corridors I'm talking about, these are all 1.2 meter passageways, again a luxury in a commercial facility, but the amount of time that certain pens of pigs may have to enter and leave the house for weighings, either individual or group weighings, passageways like this just make the work so much more efficient and safer for both the operator and the pigs. But behind me, the feed system that feeds the pigs in this building, then the dry pro system, the valve here drops down the feed into a single space feeder. All the feeders contain one of these sensors in it, and this is the sensor then that tells the computer to include this valve in the next feed run or not, depending on how much feed is in it. And these are wet dry feeders, and it's a pelleted type feed that's fed in here, and there's a supplementary additional water supplied beside it as well. So these pens in their standard configuration would be about 4.2 meters by 2.4 meters, and the maximum capacity of one of these pens is about 14 pigs. We typically tend to run these pens at around 12 to 13 pigs at the most, typically around 12. As I said, they are intact litters. Just one other feature of our finishing accommodation out here is something that wouldn't really be in a commercial facility. It's purely because of the research component that we do here, is the water. We have in all the pens within this room and the weaner building the ability to supply, I suppose, a localized treated water. So each corridor here would have 4 different coloured valves, with each pen being able to drink the water from each of those coloured pipes or valves. We have another mix house bin where we can add in maybe an acid or a treatment, be it from a therapeutic standpoint or be it from a purely research standpoint, to create another level of research or either treatment to the pen. So we can feed a specific water treatment to a specific pen, and that's the real beauty of this system. We don't have to blanket treat a number of pens. So that is a great addition to have here, and compounded with the feed system, the penning we can remove. It really offers us a wide array of facilities to call on in the research we perform here in the facility. Okay, so one of the last points to discuss, I suppose, here about the facility is the ventilation. The ventilation is the same principle in both buildings. It's a soft air diffuse system we use, and why we're standing outside the building, I suppose, is to start at the start of the ventilation process, where this green mesh here behind me on the eave of the building, this is responsible for the air intake. So the entire attic space is one big void, and the air is supplied through this green meshing, and the ceilings inside in the rooms where the pigs reside then is insulated with fiberglass insulation around 6 inches, and the ceiling itself, the corrugated sheeting, then is perforated with little holes. So what this does is the fan inside in the pig environment extracts the stale air out through the chimney in the roof. That creates a negative pressure within the pig environment, which draws down this fresh air from the attic void down into the pigs themselves. So it's kind of a slow moving air exchange that provides kind of a slow chill factor, or no chill factor really, to the pigs. It's common to all the area within the room, and no pen of pigs really is kind of, I suppose, disadvantaged by fast airflow over another pen.
So that concludes our virtual tour of the Moorepark Pig Research Facility. I hope you enjoyed what you saw. We did our best to, I suppose, give you a brief overview of most items and facilities we have here, just to kind of, I suppose, raise your curiosity. And if we have done so, we'll welcome any questions you have now over the next while. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of the virtual Pig Week.
Perfect. So as Tomás said there, that is the last of our videos for this afternoon of the Moorepark unit, but not the last of the questions. So I'm joined again by the panelists Tomás and Aisling. And just on that third clip there, Tomás, we might start there, and I just have a couple of questions. Firstly, on the finisher performance in Moorepark, could you just maybe chat us through what sort of performance you're achieving on the farm at the moment?
Yeah, no problem, Emer, thanks. Yeah, so I suppose some viewers who tune into the kind of monthly updates we give would have kind of a small insight as to our finished performance as it is, but I'll just recap on how we're getting on year to date. So up until kind of, I suppose, the first 3 quarters of the year, up until September, our carcass weight was still just over 90 kilos. Typically that would be based on 22 and a half week growth span. So that's typically our finishers up here in the main unit are typically averaging around 1100 grams a day. Our transfer over to the finishers is around the 35 kilo mark, and that is at pigs of 11 weeks of age.
Perfect. Thanks, Tomás. And just sticking maybe with the finishers, we saw there in the facilities that you've got both wet feeding and wet dry feeder systems. So just in your own experience, Tomás, maybe managing the 2 systems, do you notice any difference, or are there any differences between pig performance on wet versus wet dry feeding?
Yes, thanks, Emer. Yeah, so we have 5 production batches here in the unit over the cycle of 15 weeks. So 4 of those batches would reside in the wet dry feeders, and the 5th batch then will go to our wet feed. And just to give people a small background, pretty much every batch that goes on the wet feed then is on bespoke experiments. So I suppose we're never really comparing like with like from a dietary standpoint. But just to look at them anecdotally, or what I would have noticed myself from managing the facility, the wet feed pigs, so the wet feed fed pigs would normally I suppose they would grow faster. To put a number on it, looking at some experiments, around 50 grams a day. So you'd be looking at maybe around 1150 grams on the wet feed versus 1100 grams on our wet dry feed. I suppose efficiency though in the wet feed isn't as good as it is on the wet dry system, on the pellets. Just to put a number on those again, maybe a feed conversion efficiency on the wet feed around 2.45 versus maybe 2.35 on the wet dry. Now I know Dr. Peter Lawler will cover this topic again more in depth tomorrow. So I suppose if anyone has any particular interest in that question, I know Peter will definitely deal with it in a lot more detail than I'm able to tomorrow. But yeah, typically that's what we would see at face value here in the unit.
Great, Tomás, thank you very much. And what we might do now is maybe just go back to the start, because you have a couple of questions in just on the sow performance in Moorepark. So back to the first video, but I might put this to yourself, Aisling, please. You mentioned there that you're achieving at the moment a farrowing rate of 96%, which really is an excellent figure. But I suppose the question is, maybe looking at it from an annual point of view, would you be achieving that high annually? Or maybe any changes that you might have made on the farm to achieve this 96% farrowing rate?
Yeah, no problem. So I suppose to break down that 96%, that is based on our last quarter. So that would be approximately 120 sows, about 3 batches of sows that have gone through, have gave us that 96%. So obviously we're quite delighted with that rate. It's quite high. And then if we move it back to 6 months before that, we were getting a 91% farrowing rate. And if we move it even further back, then again to a 12-month period, say our previous 12-month period was 87%. At the moment, we would be hoping that we're going to come in around over the 90% for, say, this annual farrowing rate percentage. And I would say that it's a collective of doing lots of small things all together that has gained that 96% rather than one thing in particular. So we're quite lucky here that our AI is delivered, we're like first on the delivery route, so it's as fresh as it can be really. So we get a batch in on a Friday morning, and then we'll get the remainder in here on a Monday morning. And storage and management of that AI is crucial, really, to the farrowing rate as well. So we've experienced stockmen who know what they're doing. They're handling that very gently. They're turning it 3 times a day gently, and managing the storage around the 17 degrees to make sure optimal management of it, really. As well, our cleanliness of our sows would be a big thing. Our cleanliness overall of the sows would be a big thing, but particularly in the service area, managing that and making sure that there's nothing there that could interfere with the service. And then as well, with the experienced stockmen and knowing what they're doing, really, and working as a team is really helping bring that farrowing rate up.
Brilliant, Aisling. So you're sort of saying it's those small things, those simple things done right, which
Yeah,
is important.
exactly. Like looking over how the service happens and looking at every small part of that can really help.
Perfect, Aisling. That's fantastic. And just maybe sticking with yourself, Aisling, and sticking with the sows. We mentioned there that you're on a batch farrowing system in Moorepark. So could you perhaps give us just a general overview of how you manage those batches?
Yeah, no worries. So we're typically around the 200 sow unit, and that breaks down into about 7 batches of kind of 28 to 30 sows a batch. So we're running on a 3-week system here, and that's going from farrowing to weaning to service in rotation. So our batches then will run through that, and then from service they stay in the dry sow house, which is mentioned in the video, until they come back in then to the farrowing rooms again on their farrow week.
Great, thank you, Aisling. And sticking with the sows and maybe moving back to yourself, Tomás, we just had a question there about the replacement rate on the farm, and maybe when we're on that topic of your replacement rate figure, maybe you could chat us through the gilt breeding policy on farm as well, please.
Yeah, no problem, Emer. So we're looking at probably around 45 to 48% replacement rate for this year, 2020. I suppose the herd is in existence 4 years now, and it's been a little skewed for different research work we've done over the past while. So we had a big drive this year really to get a lot of youth and a lot of gilts into the herd. Another thing we've also looked at over the last number of months is we buy in our replacement gilts here in Moorepark in the herd. So we're looking now with the last probably 2 months, we're bringing them in at around 60 to 80 kilos, and rearing them on a Moorepark gilt developer diet we have here, and bringing them up into the unit probably around the 120 kilo mark, and getting them used to the systems and whatnot here. And because, as Aisling said, it's a batch system, all our gilts are synchronized to come on heat to coincide with the batch. So I suppose the breeding numbers really, or I suppose the gilt specifics, we were really targeting gilts around the 35 weeks of age for service, and really up at the heavier side of the 150 kilo marker that way also.
Perfect. Thank you, Tomás. And just one last question that I might put to yourself, because I am conscious of time. We saw there that you are working with an ESF system in the dry sow house. So I wonder, could you maybe just, we saw in the video there that you've got the separate feeder for the gilts, but maybe give us a taste of the labour input required when you are running an electronic sow feeding system.
Yeah, okay. So that's a nice link from the gilts we're talking about. So when the gilts are up in the unit, we use that time pre-service to get them used to the unit itself, and to train them and kind of get them familiar with it. Our normal goal is that the gilts are fully kind of proficient and used to the station before service, so that when services happen, they can literally just join that. Their batch will join the existing batches that are in there, and it's seamless enough. The main trick with the station itself, I suppose, where you have to really start looking at is the person who's training the animals and training that person, because that's the key to the success. So the real labour requirement is in that initial training phase. We find the gilts are very responsive to learning new ways and new systems. I suppose if you were looking at converting an existing herd over to an ESF system, there is challenges there with the older sows and probably learning new tricks as such and learning how to work the station. But once our initial labour input is in there, the gilts are trained and trained well, then they become very confident with it. We're lucky here that we can kind of hold our animals, I suppose, our gilts in the separate, smaller accommodation for that first party, so they're more confident when they join the main herd. But from a labour point of view, it's great. As I said in the video, we can draft out sows for farrowing, we can draft out sows for trial work and for vaccinations. 9 times out of 10, we come in on a given day, check the eating record for both the gilts and the sows, and it will normally be 100% on both, and then we can just take a quick walk through. One small point to note from a breeding point of view are repeats. Not that we have that many repeats, I must say, which is great, but there is 2 boar pens located in the house, and if a sow spends a certain amount of time at the boar, that will also send a signal to the station to draft that animal out as a possible heat detection, which is another labour saver and bonus as well.
Fantastic. And like I said, I'm conscious of time. We are approaching the bottom of the hour, and I'm sure time is ticking for those of you who are on your lunch break and joining us. So just to start off, I'd like to say thank you very much for joining us on day 1 of our virtual Pig Week. A huge thank you to our panelists, Tomás and Aisling. As well as that, we have a few people to thank in the background who've given us a huge hand in getting this virtual week together. So we'd like to thank Alison Maloney, Michelle Lavelle, Eric Donald in PR. And we'd also like to thank the wider PR team and all of those in the Teagasc Pig team and the wider team who have given us so much assistance, particularly Orla Canan, for all the hard work she's done in getting the videos and getting this week together. Just to remind you that the recorded version of today's session and the sessions for the rest of the week will be up on the Teagasc website next week. Should be started to get uploaded from Monday of next week. So if you want to catch up or if you want to recommend it to anybody who might have missed out, they will be available from next week. To remind you, we will be back tomorrow at the same time, 1:30, with day 2, where we're going to be looking at some of the husbandry practices in pig production. So that's it for today. Thank you very much for joining us and stay safe.